this one before, so
Why are you reading that one?
just gotta keep your mind sharp. Gotta read something above your level.
Eric Vogelin, man, he's insane.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's like a next level scholar.
Yeah,
You know,
I think
so-
academics have to be like, wait a second, what just happened?
So, but I always try and grab a book, a couple times a year that I know is just too hard,
To make you to
admit that we have to concentrate.
Well, then why am I reading Eric Vogelin if you're like, oh, it's too hard?
I gave you Science, Politics, and Gnosticism, which is kind of his popularization.
Yeah,
I know it's funny because that's his version of a popularization, because he's got a longer version of that book.
Yeah, that's the blue. So I have one that's like that.
Yeah. So you have the one, and it's got both of them in it. The longer academic version and then the popularized version. But even his popularized stuff it's just hard. He's dealing in specialized vocabulary. It's unrecognizable to him. But then he's also he's trying to look at he's trying to disassemble the assumptions of the culture.
Look at the thinking of the culture.
Look at the thinking of a culture, and so it's hard to turn your eyes in on yourself, and that's what he's trying. He's trying to kind of hold up the mirror and say, "Turn your eyes in on yourself," and we don't do that well.
No.
I mean, nobody does that well. It's hard. There's not. You always end up having to talk about the way you use words is hard, because you have to use words to talk about the way you use words. So it's always just a little bit of a stretch. So
all right. So the number one requested thing that I get
What's
when
that?
we do a show, no matter, and it's all over YouTube. It's on even Instagram. Yeah, but mostly people when they see me. By the way, I got to shout out real quick to Kyle and Heather, who were just in town. And they came in for James White because he was in the studio with us for Cross Politic. I think they just came in just to hang out. I think they're having their 10-year anniversary, if I remember correctly.
Awesome.
And she's pregnant with their 4th child.
That's exciting.
But here's what's really crazy. They actually like the show. They actually like whatever this is. And they said it was probably the most underrated podcast out there. And I just want to say, God bless them.
Amen.
I mean, and that baby.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. And
You could probably name it David Jason.
DJ.
DJ, yeah, exactly.
I don't think it's that good of a podcast. No, man, it was very encouraging, because we just sit here and, again, you're helping me learn, because of what I do with Cross Politic, what I do with going on other shows and just talking. You're helping me learn, like I'm seeing as a filmmaker, really. So as a filmmaker, I feel like it's my biggest tool, my biggest weapon. And so when I get to make films, I am directing the narrative, directing the story, directing what people are saying, but what they really are trying to get at, what they really, really mean, right? Like that's part of my craft. So this is kind of helping me. I'm getting the feedback here. I don't know where it's coming from. It's like a headset or something. Anyway, you probably won't be able to hear it here.
Yeah.
But so shout out to them. But the number one thing that people ask me about is book list.
Really?
That's it. Everybody wants a book list,
Yeah.
and we don't have it anywhere.
Yeah, we could start putting one together. The problem is my book list will get really long.
I don't think they care.
They don't care? Okay.
Do you know how many books I bought since we started talking? Literally, like I can go to my Amazon. Hold on, I'm gonna do this. This is crazy because I need to see if the other book is here too.
The thing that more and more I'm realizing is the books that have helped me the most of them have gone out of print, and so now you've got Amazon too. So man, Amazon is such a huge blessing. But I used to hunt through. I'd have a list of books I was looking for that I'd find in footnotes, and then go to used bookstores and hunt for them. Go to Powell's in Portland with a list, and that's where I got this one, Powell's in Portland.
Okay, Powell's.
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 It's I don't know if it still is. It was the largest bookstore on the West Coast for a long time.
Okay, I'm gonna go back.
But this was back before you could just get stuff on Amazon, anything you wanted, right? And so
Yep.
I'd have this list of things I'd find in footnotes, and then so I found this one. I was really excited because it's out of print, and it just shift. Those are some of the books where you have somebody that lives through a transition in society and is looking at it happen and is able to compare the new thing to what it was like before, right? So you've got this one. It's an older Dutch pastor. This book, The Idea of Office. This is the one I sent you this week.
Yeah, hold on. So here's I'm going back through my list right now on Amazon, and I'm just grabbing all the books. Okay. I think you told me about After Virtue.
So I imagine so.
A Study in Moral. Let me see what it says. A Study in Morality. After Virtue. Toby told me about Up from Liberalism, so that wasn't you, so I don't blame that one on you. But I know when that started getting crazy. And then I got Counter Woke Craft, and that it was James Lindsay co-authored that book. Love in the Body you told me to get.
Yep.
Love in the Body was you. The Common Mind.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah. See, I'm gonna do this right now so people can be like, what? Because I know they're writing them down. The Common Mind, Politics, Society, and Christian Humanism from Thomas More to Russell Kirk.
Yep. Yeah, great book.
And then let's see where else I got. That's my son's. The New England Pulpit. The New England. What is this? Got to jump inside of here to go read all the titles. The full title. The New England Pulpit and the American Revolution. When American pastors preached politics, resisted tyranny, and founded a nation on the Bible. Wow, what a title. That's a puritanical title if I heard one.
Yeah, the Puritans like the long titles.
I think it was Jared Longshore, but that might have been you too, because I bought it because Reform Ethics from Bavinck.
Oh, from Bavinck. I've read Bavinck, but I haven't read that one.
So then that was Jared Longshore. That wasn't on you.
Bavinck's stuff on metaphysics is really interesting.
And then this is when it got heavy. The Divine Comedy, Part 1,
oh, yeah.
Part 2, Part 3, The One and the Many by Rush Dooney.
Necessities.
Yep. The New Radicalism in America.
Ooh, I haven't read that one. That one wasn't me. But that sounds
Are
really
you sure?
interesting. Yeah.
1889 to 1963 by Christopher Leach. Oh, it was C.R. Wiley.
Okay.
That one wasn't you. Boy, people are just getting all these good books right now. The other one was Calvin's Doctrine and the Word.
Yep, that's Wallace. That one is
absolute must.
Amazing.
Okay, I got to throw in one from my guy, Joe Boot, Ruler of Kings. Might as well just grab that one too. Studies in Words.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, yep. And this one I just bought you this one, the Metaphysical Foundation of American History. That was from actually David Fowler, right?
You didn't just buy me this one. You just got me a signed copy of this one.
A signed copy of that one. I don't even know how. What else do we have?
It smells like a bookstore. It's nice.
From Office to Profession.
Yeah, that one's fantastic. It's really helpful.
Preaching with Confidence.
James Dane.
The Gravedigger Files. Os Guinness. That's a must. And this one was huge. Modern Times Revisited.
Yeah.
By
Paul Johnson.
Paul Johnson. And then I got everything else from Paul Johnson too. A History of American People by Paul Johnson. Intellectuals from Marx to...
Yeah, that one's eye-opening. That one walks through the biography of a bunch of the people that have set the vocabulary of the current conversation that we're in. So you kind of learn what it's. They're short biographies, but it's surprising, because you'll hear people sometimes say that there is a fallacy to say, well, if you know somebody's biography, then you know where their ideas came from, and you can't necessarily, in a straightforward way, judge ideas according to their biography. At the same time, wisdom is known by its fruit, right? If you've got somebody who is a drunk and they write everything drunk, and then you take it seriously, like somebody that wrote Sober, you've missed the point of there's wisdom that you need to find there. So, yeah, there's another one by E. Michael Jones that fills out that question, but I'll put it on the book list when I put it together.
I think you need to do a book club.
I mean, just tell people, here's what I'm reading. Jump in. Let's read it together.
Yeah, I'd pay for that. Oh, Matt, that was the other thing that Kyle and Heather said thanks, Neil, for, I don't know what it is, but it's just, I hear it buzzing from somewhere and it's just driving me nuts. And I can't think what hearing anyway. But they said they sign up for every Fight, Laugh, Feast class that we put on, like master class.
Yeah.
And they said they took yours and they said it was phenomenal.
Oh, okay.
And they said the title was horrible.
I tried.
They didn't say that part.
I changed the title to what you wanted me to.
What was the title?
I don't know. From Pen to Heart, I think, is what you ended up.
That's a great title. What are they talking about?
I don't know.
Kyle and Heather, you guys are wrong. I thought you came up with the title. But anyway, they said the title was horrible, or they said the title was lacking. You would never think that the class would be that broad and that wide because of the title. Yeah. And I think we were probably being too poetic. I'm sorry. I was being too poetic. And
I think I just called it like screenwriting with Jason Farley or something. So you were like, no, that's a bad name.
No, we're not doing that. And then but they said they took those. And I was like, well, what you should do is, take and create a class where I think you kind of go through these processes of Gnosticism and work it out to our current thought, or maybe like modern American thought, the development of, or maybe in conversation with modern American thought or something like that, and track from, the establishment of America all the way to our current time right now, like a historical class. Like, I would take that's kind of what we're doing here.
Right? It is.
And so,
except here's the deal is, like anything, like everything, I kind of take the shotgun approach to. Like, here's a bunch of examples of this thing. Let's talk around and through. And I'm not very good at that, like, linear.
Well, then we should do it together then, because then I can set up I'm a director. I can set up the linear process, and then we can just kind of punch through it. Because here's the book that last time we talked. There's these last two things have really been really interesting for me. So we went through the legal realities of what Christ had did through Melchizedek, right?
Yeah.
And in that process, you basically took an axe to Gnosticism, Christian Gnosticism, and rebuilt that house. Like, you just took out all the mold, right? And all the mildew that was stinking.
The Leviticus 14.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Leviticus 14, bro. And you went through it and you just gutted that joker out. And then you came back and said, okay, it's clean, but
what are we actually building?
What are we building? What do we fill it with? Because if you don't fill it with anything, this was the next episode that we did, you basically are going to get, who was it that was talking about this? Now I can't remember the name, but it wasn't Vogelin. It was, what did he call it? Violence? Neurotic, erotic,
Walker Percy.
Percy,
right. You get the possession of
violence.
A culture by a different spirit.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so the house is clean, but we got to put something in the house, right?
Right.
So erotic violence is the word I was looking for. Walker Percy. I don't know why I got his book right here. Yeah. Couldn't remember him. And so it's really interesting that it feels like that this is going to another place. And one of the things that we kind of settled inside of the last episode was offices. You really spend a lot of time dealing with offices. And as we're talking off the phone, we'll have just as long conversations on the phone about this. And you're like, I don't think we have any concept of offices. And so you kind of walk through offices back then and through that. And then you got this book.
Yeah. Well, and then I realized, like, oh, well, I remember where I came across this laid out for the first time. And it's this book, The Idea of Office. It's a little tiny book. It's less than 100 pages. K. Sietsma. It's just a Dutch pastor writing in the 50s, and he was living through the loss of the idea of offices. And so we talked through kind of the metaphysical reason that the idea of an office, of a true, real authority in the world, was undercut by the growing Gnosticism. And so we walked through that. But he actually just walks through what is it that's being actually lost as he looks around. What is it that's being lost as the offices are undermined and disappear and dissolved? Really, it's not like people even necessarily set out and said, "I'm going to go destroy this office or that office." It was just dissolved. The offices were dissolved. The authority, the weight of the offices was dissolved over the course of generations, no longer believing in the reality of them. We're starting to think. So
yeah, it's chipped away at it's like termites after a while.
Yeah.
But so that termite was?
Well, the termite was a Gnosticism that equated the economic realities with ontological realities. So the idea that an office holds is that there's a real authority that a person steps into and wears the office or wears the authority, not because they're ontologically superior, but because they've been put into that position. They've been and you know that office holds an authority that doesn't depend upon the ontological superiority of the person holding it. So it's an office that how is it that a judge can make legal decisions on behalf of a city, on behalf of a state? He can be the one that represents the state. Well, it's because the office of judge is one that he wears, and that's why he puts a robe on, right? He wears the office. He wears the robe. And so he isn't ontologically superior, but the office does hold a real authority in the world. But just about the only office that's left is judge, right? Because coercive power is the only thing that's still recognized.
Well, the only offices that are held right now that people observe are political offices.
Yeah, well, and judge has become a political office.
Right,
so it wasn't considered a political office before, right? It's a legal office.
People actually don't make
we
a
don't
separation
we don't
between
make the
legal.
distinction. Yeah.
You know what? That's a really good distinction. Distinguish the two between, because I think when people hear politics and they hear politics, they hear laws, right? And those two things. So the legality, and because you have legislators who are making laws, and then you have judges over here, and so they're kind of all merged together through the legislature. Matter of fact, Ketanji Brown Jackson was complaining at her hearing. They were mad at her for some of the lenient judgments that she has towards potential pedophiles, and she said, your Congress has not given me any sort of strict standard to follow. So if you're mad at me for following,
right?
So the whole thing kind of got blurry, where no one was responsible at that point except for legislators. So separate those two, because I think those people think of those politics and it's judges,
right? Yeah. So the political authority is representative, and it's representative of the people, right? And in a Christian understanding, it's also representative of God, right? So it's a dual representation, just like a pastor is a dual representative. It's a representative of the people towards God, representative of God towards the people. But a judge is a representative of God and the law, right? So the jury is the representatives. They're the representatives of the city. So when they come in, they're making judgments on behalf of the city. The judge is the sitting representative of the law, not of the city, right? So it's still a representative office, but it's not representative of us, right? The judge isn't, so a political office is representative of the people, whereas a legal office is representative of the law, right? So, this is the Lex Rex, Rex Lex debate. Is the law king over the king, or is the king over the law? Well, the king is a representative of the people, and therefore the law is over the king. Now, in the ancient world, you also had a mixture because the king was also a judge often,
right?
But he had to be able, a wise king was able to pull those two offices apart in practice, even though he held both of them, right? So that's why you get very complex outfits, very complex robes, different things, because each part of the robe represents different parts of the office or different offices held by the same person, right? So, in the ancient world, you would, when a king getting dressed had to do with him moving from his private person to his public person. Right? So his public person holds these offices, and so each thing that a king would wear was a aspect of his office, because he had to put it each on, because when he wasn't holding court, he wasn't exercising those offices.
Is it fair to say too, this is what happened when we see the patriarchy kind of get dissolved? We see these offices split.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
So when the patriarchy is dissolved because they reject Joseph, right? The patriarchy is dissolved. Now the legal reality, the legal inheritor of the patriarchy is still ends up being there, because Joseph was never. So the coat of many colors that he's given is a sign that he is going to become the next patriarch, right? It's a robe. It's a judge's robe.
Right.
It's a patriarch's robe. So he's the representative of God to the people, right? He's the rainbow that stands between. He's the covenantal. He's.
Why have I not ever put that together before? Oh my
right?
goodness.
He's the rainbow in the sky.
Right? He's the covenant mark between
the covenant mark.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
So
I'm so stupid.
So it's not just like, oh, he got a really nice jacket and
it has
everybody's
rainbow
jealous
colors.
of it, right? Yeah, he is chosen, even though he's the youngest. He's chosen as the covenant representative, which is what his older brothers are jealous about.
I'm so mad. Right. I'm sorry. I'm still stuck at the rainbow. Why did I not ever see the rainbow?
It's the poetry of it.
It's
the poetry of history.
I'm sorry. It's happening live, and everybody's
right?
like, duh, Knox never saw I saw the rainbow. Duh, dude. Like, talk all this typology, and you missed it. No one ever talks about the rainbow.
Well, I don't know if I guess it's typology, or it's just reading visually, right?
It's typology, bro. Like, that's
it's because we don't read poetry anymore.
That's true, and the fact that when we I think it's how we come to the Bible. We come to the Bible to get a bunch of, and it's not that we don't need facts or things that are found, but we're looking for something else instead of reading the whole story. Right. So when we see the rainbow, we should easily go back to Noah, right? Like that should go ding, 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 ding. I probably everybody look. I know I'm slower than most. Okay, I get it. So everybody else goes, "Oh yeah, duh." I didn't.
I mean, I think
just say
we don't learn. We're an illiterate culture.
Thanks.
So it's not like, I mean, learning to read is I think we equate the ability to sound out letters with learning to read. When learning to read is this, it's a generational process,
and it's
really
very robust.
Yeah.
It's funny because when I was reading, you have me By Faith by J. Gresham Machen. That's another book that you put me onto that I have to finish reading. But he talks about that in there, though, that it's not just learning facts, but facts are extremely important. You have to learn those, but it isn't. It's very classical. It's grammar, right? It's logic, and then there's rhetoric, right? And then so we usually read between somewhere in the grammar and the logic stage, and we never get to the rhetoric stage,
right?
And it's because, and this is what he was lamenting. He was lamenting the lack of intellectual thinking that is dying in the culture, right?
Right. Yeah.
And intellectual broadly, not like, these are just for college folks up here, right?
Right. Well, his, if I remember right, his mom wrote one of the authoritative works on, I can't remember if it was Elizabeth Barrett Browning or Robert Browning, their brother and sister, and but one of the great kind of transition between the neoclassical and romantic poets. He was raised by a mom who was a great scholar of poetry. And poetry is really the rhetoric stage, right? Like, we tend to think of poetry as being the thing for kids, but really, the grammar and logic stages that kids grow through. I mean, there's different ways to think about it, because you're always learning grammar and logic and rhetoric of all sorts of things, and all throughout your life. But kids also grow through certain stages, and the rhetoric stage is basically when they hit puberty and they start needing to come across as they start becoming aware of how they're coming across, but also needing to communicate across boundaries, right? Because all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, she's really curvy and I want to be close to her.
Right.
I should probably start a band and write poetry, right? Like, it's
just like Adam. That's when he hit puberty, was when Eve was made.
He wakes up and he sees her and he's like, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Let's talk metaphor and simile and start writing poetry. And
isn't that the man's first recorded words was when Adam saw Eve? Was that correct?
Oh man, I need to look. That's a really good question. I think that's
the first recorded words in the Bible from man.
From men, yeah,
is when he saw Eve, and it was
because the things that we know about God, when we're told Adam and Eve are made in His image, we're told that He speaks, and that His poetic speech or musical speech creates. Right. So we know that that's central to being made in the image of God. Is that he's a word-based creature, right? But so
I didn't mean to sidetrack you from
totally.
The judges and the politics and
often, like, you hear people say Christianity is a logocentric religion, and we're like, yes, logocentric, right? Which is true. The thing that we don't understand, though, is how deep and broad and wide the nature of words are, right? And so we think that means, good, my facts don't have to care about your feelings because we're logocentric, or when really that means we should be the poetic people. We should be a poet people, a poetry infused people, because poetry is language matured and grown up, right? And so we often just don't get to it.
Why you beat me with this right now? Okay, so did we finish?
No,
we
didn't finish it. We never finished it.
Go back to the separate. So so if I remember correctly, judges represent the law.
Yeah.
And God.
Yeah. So judges represent the law, God and the law. There's always every office has an aspect in which they're representing God. So
jury represents people.
Yeah, so jury represents people, but they're also trying to represent the justice of God, right?
Yeah,
but it's in a
plurality of wisdom, right?
Right. So as they grow into wisdom, everything represents God, but there's a representative. There's a fundamental poetic nature to community, right? Whereas there's a representational nature to the way things are set up, and offices assume that, right? That you can have the office of judge, and somebody steps into, they can represent the law to us.
My head's clicking. I'm sorry. I'm having these moments now, but that really does, like you just said with poetry, this goes back to the ontological economic realities, that harmony of those. If you don't have that, you do lose a justice system.
Right. You lose a justice system, you lose a legal system, right? So this book,
wow.
So I haven't finished it yet. So I'm just in the beginnings of
what's this book?
Understanding. So this is Eric Voegelin's. This was the first book he wrote on the form of the American mind. And
Science, Politics, and Gnosticism by Eric Voegelin is another book.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the later one. That's after. So this one he writes before Hitler comes to power. That one he writes after Hitler's come to power. World War II has happened, and so this one he's saying, "Hey, I'm worried about some of the directions things are going." Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. He's like, yeah. So it all led to murder. Mass murder.
I was right.
And let's dig in and find out how it was that we could step in and justify that level of mass murder. So Science, Politics, and Gnosticism, he's digging into the foundation. I think he's actually figured out what he's at this point he's just worried about. He finds it after World War I or after World War II.
So can I ask a stupid question?
Yeah.
Please don't make too much fun of me. What do you call someone who's kind of like an archaeologist, anthropologist? Like, what do you call those guys? You know, because he's basically looking at the ruins of Hitler and those guys, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, let's go back. Historians?
He's kind of a socio-historian or sort of historian of society or historian of ideas.
Something like that.
Something like that.
Sure there's a name
I'm
for
sure
it.
there is a name for it.
Because he's looking at old dead things and saying, okay, how do we get this and where did it come from? Okay, anyway, go ahead.
And but in this one, he's, now I can't remember why I started talking about.
We were talking about offices. And
So he's saying, he's watching things dissolve, and he's trying to say, why is it that things just don't make sense anymore, right? And that you've got these two different major streams, these two different theories of how it is that we can scientifically investigate humankind. One is through culture, right? Through the artifacts, the rituals, the way that a culture organizes itself, and the other is by trying to discover what is the spirit of the culture. The German word is the Geist, which is, it's like the ghost. What's haunting the culture? What's the ghost that's haunting the culture? And he looks at them both and says, those are Kantian options, and that concerns me. And he tries to say, what is it that makes it, that separates those two things? Why is it that those two things have been pulled apart?
Kantian, just quickly remind.
So Kant said that the universal mind or the universal spirit,
okay, I'm remembering,
is pushing the world towards maturity through the conflict of opposites.
And they'll never get there at some, but that's
right. That there, if it's going to get there, it's way down the road. But in the meantime, you've got these Kantian opposites. They have to come into conflict, and through conflict, you get a new thing.
Oh, that's
born,
so World War I.
Okay, it is, right? So it's World War, and he's writing between the wars, right? And he's looking at this and saying, okay,
Eric Voegelin's writing
Eric Voegelin, and he's saying that what would a non-Kantian option be, or why we've accepted these Kantian options as if they're the only ones, and so
that you have to have these things come into conflict.
But he says the thing is that America. But his claim is that America, though, has actually captured the mind of Europe because Europe it has strong traditions. It's connected to the soil, and it has a common blood heritage in each of these different places, right? So you've got, and he says America. People drop in, and what holds them together? Well, the ideas hold them together, which is why I'm excited to read The Metaphysical Foundations of American History by Van Zandt, because I think he's digging in from the American side to that same question. So Voegelin says, who is America? What is the thing that holds America together? And he says, if we've only got Kantian options, then where, that actually doesn't leave us with the ability to understand how the American mind is held together because you've got this, because for him, he's German. What is it that makes a German a German? Well, they're born on German soil. They have German ancestry. They're German. Well, what is it that makes an American? Well, at that point, you look around and you say, well, they're American blood, there's no such thing, right? They're a mixture of peoples. Born on American soils, well, you've got, that's a legal reality, but you've got all of these people whose parents were not born on American soil, but they're born on American soil. You've got this mixture of people from all over the place that suddenly find themselves gathered in a place that's not their place, right? So, so you've got Swiss people, German people, African people, Spanish people, Italian people, that the soil that they identify with, or the soil that they come from, is no longer under their feet.
Matter of fact, they almost bring more of the places where they come from as their identifying marks.
Right.
So I'm Scottish.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, I'm African. I'm Italian. Italy.
Yeah.
Hey.
And between the wars, you've got this growth of all of the different identification groups, right? You start to get the Swedish lodges and the groups that start to say like, oh, St. Patrick's Day is a bigger celebration in America than Ireland, right?
Right.
This is
Cinco de Mayo.
It is, right? That's true, right? So, because it's still happening to this day, people come into America because of the ideas of freedom. The idea. So he says, what is it that really holds them together? What is the spirit of the American mind? Now, I haven't figured out what he's going to say the answer is, but it's helpful because what he does say is that that America starts with a common law tradition, but is in the middle of moving, right? In his day, it's moving to what's called a positive law tradition. Right. So,
which is bad, by the way.
Which is bad. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's very, and so I think people, positive law, negative law, I don't know if people understand that. I could try and summarize, you just correct me if I'm wrong, but basically when you look at God's law, the Ten Commandments, it's a negative law, right? It limits what shouldn't be done. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit a murder. Keep the Sabbath day is you shall not work. Yeah. So all of them, I think people can argue 9 of them were negative, maybe 1 positive. Like you can make that argument, but I still would say they're all negative. Anything outside of that, go for it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like anything that doesn't, stop you from anything that's not murder, But so positive law would be like, okay, and you have to have a driver's license. Yep. You have to have plates. You can't have a tail light. It forces you to define. They would say in the kindest way what loving your neighbor looks like, and if you aren't doing those things, then you're not loving your neighbor.
Yeah, but it attaches coercive force
to it,
to what you must do.
It's making me nervous because I'm concerned that David Fowler is going to be listening to this, and he's going to have so much more to say about positive and negative law, and he's making me nervous. So I wish he wouldn't listen.
But but it's a shift. So there, you can have a few, some positive laws that exist within a common law system, and you can have some negative laws that exist within a positive law system. But what it is what is the trunk of the law? Yeah. And so he's writing about his concern is what happens in America, right? What happens in America, a people that aren't connected by blood or soil, when it pushes into a positive law thing. So he says, because he's beginning. I mean, because positive law is a way of thinking about the law, that the law is the thing that creates the community. The law is the thing that creates society, right? Mm-hmm. So you no longer whereas that coercion is the thing that creates authority, right? So coercion creates authority, and law creates society, right? Whereas in a common law system and within a Christian understanding, is God establishes offices, and so the root of the authority in offices is God's love, right? So God gives the gift of offices to a people, and then those offices hold authority, and the people submit themselves to the offices. Now, coercive force is entailed in some of the offices,
but it's very limited.
But it's limited.
It's negative. Right? It's very limited.
It's negative. So in the offices don't use the coercive force to create anything. The offices use coercive force to protect the space in which the community is created. Right.
Oh man. Okay.
And the so the kinds of so there ends up being all sorts of offices and authority, but father and mother are parental offices. Right? The police officer is a legal office. The judge is a legal office, and then president, which is sort of it's kind of a made up office, but you have it's an executive. It holds the
what
executive
about Constitution
office.
Wouldn't that be the office or a representative?
So the Constitution is a way of
it's a covenantal agreement.
It's a covenantal agreement. It's a way of writing down the commonly agreed in a common law system. A constitution is a way of writing down and agreeing upon what is the commonly held legal structure, or what are the commonly held offices. Commonly held meaning held by us all. What are the things that we all already say? These are the offices that we recognize.
Mm-hmm,
right?
Mm-hmm.
In a positive law situation, a constitution is a way of forming something new. Right? And so you see in the French Revolution a positivist law version of the writing of a constitution, and in the American Revolution, a common law version of the writing of a constitution. Right? So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So and one of them is created through and then creates more violence, right, in the French Revolution, that leads eventually to the need for the takeover by a tyrant to set everything right again. Napoleon comes along, and he is a tyrant, and he's sort of a blessing to a people that have gone mad, right?
Wow.
But he's
Elon Musk.
Oh man,
he's Elon, and they're Twitter, and he comes Twitter, in. Right? That's what this is.
Oh man, we're in trouble. No, because that actually this is something that
might be true.
May have been true. And then in the American Revolution, the Constitution is really a mix of here's all the things we agree on, and then the creation of some new offices in order to move the executive authority, the executive office, into a new situation. Right. So George Washington could have become king. There's very little doubt amongst historians that had he said, "I'm going to hold this office for the rest of my life," that it could have easily transferred.
We just came from that. We were close to understanding that.
And people actually were there were a lot of people that they were reluctant revolutionaries. They didn't want to overthrow the crown. They didn't actually overthrow the crown.
That's what I'm saying. They didn't.
There wasn't even an attempt to. But what you had was George Washington understanding the moment, and after 2 terms, not running for a third. And until socialism came along, you really had presidents voluntarily not running for a third term, right? It wasn't until
that's right
until you had a socialist leaning president that you had someone that said,
"Is that Roosevelt?" Who is it?
Yeah. That came along and said, "Hey, I'm sticking in it for the power, right? Right." And you see by when you get to Yalta after the war, and the way that he buddied up to Stalin and was pretty much willing to give Stalin just whatever he wanted. I think you really see Stalin the way FDR saw himself. Right? I think FDR saw himself as somebody more akin to Stalin than to president's leaving. I mean,
you gonna get stoned for that one.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, there might be people that disagree, but that's what happens in Yalta, right? He is over there making fun of Churchill. He's. Oh,
did you lose sound in your ear monitors? I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm just making sure you're good.
I talk so much, nobody.
I'm just making sure you're good.
But FDR's making fun of Churchill the whole time, buddying up to Stalin all throughout Yalta. I mean, he's also dying of cancer and nobody knows it yet, and all this. There's all sorts of things going on. But he definitely he forces us to take what was a tradition. Presidents don't run for a third term, and turn it into a law, right? Because he broke the traditional common law understanding.
There's so much of that happening.
Right, so much of that. So you've got
but you have that because people are changing.
Yeah, the connection, the historic connection is being dissolved.
The offices
are being dissolved, right? So the executive power. So America splits the royal powers. The Constitution splits royal powers into the different offices that are held by one person. And now that's happening everywhere, right? The British Empire has begun splitting off the
France is everybody.
Everybody's doing it.
It's the last time of the monarchs.
Right. So the monarchy's going away, but the office of monarch wears multiple, wears a robe and a crown, right? Because he is representing multiple things. And this is why emperors in the ancient world used to weld the crowns together of everything that they would have these big elaborate crowns because they would conquer a new place, and they would just take that crown and weld it into their crown, right? And so when they put the crown on, it was symbolic of all of the offices they held, and they held multiple thrones, and so their crowns would be these elaborate multi-throne crowns, because the authority attached was a real authority. It was a real thing. It wasn't. We tend to think in terms of social covenants, social agreements. Why is it that person has authority? Well, because we've all agreed to it. The people have given him the authority of that office. It's just simply not true. We don't live in social contracts, right? That is a way of describing offices in a way that actually dissolves them out of existence.
So it does two things too. So if it's us that are creating these offices, ultimately we've moved the chain of being too, right? So God has actually created offices, right?
Yep.
And we're to acknowledge those, which is what common law tradition is seeking to do. But we've stepped so far away from that now we're like, these offices, we can create all sorts of different offices that actually don't have any real authority except that we've decided. It's like democracy.
Yep.
It's become democracy over a republic.
Right. So a republic, it says that you've got these different offices that are held by different people at different times, whereas a tyranny says all of these offices are held by one person and then divvied out, right?
Well, we're close.
Yeah, and it's the way that our presidents use executive orders now. They act like they're a tyrant, right? I'm giving you this permission. I'm giving that. You can stop wearing a mask now when you get on an airplane, right?
Yeah.
That's the way a tyrant rules, where it says your authority is derived from me. Whereas the checks and balances, the way God sets up the world is you've got layers of authority that are intended to be checks and balances of one another because they each have their own jurisdiction. They each each authority gets to execute its opinion within its jurisdiction, but then the jurisdictions overlap.
Right.
Right.
And we don't know how they overlap. So what we've done, oh wow, this is making so much sense. So what we've done is we've messed up this economic ontological reality. So therefore, instead of our jurisdictions overlapping, they've all melted into one.
They've all melted into one and then gone up and down a pole. Whose people are only above and below one another. Whereas, if the president comes to my house, he's in my jurisdiction.
Right.
And that's a blessing, right? That's the way it's intended by God to be, is that you've got jurisdictions that overlap and for the benefit of one another.
And this is really interesting because not only do you have those jurisdictions and those offices, but then God really does have a standard for how each office is to operate. For instance, the president come over to your house. He is a guest.
Right.
How do you treat someone, right?
Exactly.
And so you're not playing favoritism to the president because you're not supposed to, right?
Right.
But you respect his office, and you also understand, like, I would treat somebody who was a bum with the same sort of
welcoming attitude, right?
Right.
So yeah, and you have when Clinton went through a communion line somewhere, and the pastor said to him something along the lines of, "The Lord will hold you responsible for what you do," as he came up to take communion, right? Totally legitimate thing for the pastor to say to him, because he was in within the jurisdiction of the church, and the Clinton sent their Secret Service to go question the guy and all this. They're like, you think you're a tyrant, right? You think you're at the top, you hold all the authority, and so that was viewed as a threat to your authority to say, well, you're on my jurisdiction, you're going to hear from my authority, right? That pastor was doing exactly what he should do, which is wear the authority that he's supposed to in terms of in his jurisdiction, and act as a check and balance to all the other authorities. That's how the offices function, which is why the office of father and mother, the office of judge, the office of pastor, the office of, these are public offices, right, that have authorities within jurisdictions, and they
actually have
overlap,
and they actually have real power. That's one thing I think we really have to emphasize on here. Those actually have real power within their jurisdiction, right, and where they overlap at too, right? So there is a fellowship and respect of authority when they overlap from both sides.
From both sides, right? So yeah, and what's interesting is you can have all the authority in the world and not have any power, right? So but if you wear your authority in service of those under your authority, you will grow in power, right? And if you sin and repent, you grow in power, right? That's Psalm 130. I confess my sins so that I will be feared, David says, right? Right. That there's a way to your authority comes from God, and then your power to enact your authority can grow or shrink, but it actually doesn't affect your authority. So you can have all the authority in the world but the power to enact that authority is actually a separate thing that also is given and taken by God.
Speaking of power and authority, I have to hit pause because you have to actually go do a conversation, and a call or whatever.
And then
I guess I'll wait a little bit because I have questions.
Then we can hop back on.
Okay.
All right.
I say stuff and I get in trouble.
What'd you say?
I went on a podcast with Eric Kahn. It was King's Cross. Was it King's Cross podcast? Oh, I can't remember the name of the podcast. Anyway, I went on a podcast with Eric Kahn, and I'm reading it. He references it, and it's something that we talked about. If Baptists and Presbyterians cannot share the same communion table, how is the church in any viable place to speak authoritatively about bridging and healing divides in American culture? or to model unity across differences. Thoughts from a recent podcast with Chocolate Knox. So he's taking probably something I've said, and he's having his own thoughts about
Yeah.
the table because of the way that you told me when we were talking last time about we made the dividing line something else other than justification.
Right.
And so it's like, wait till I start talking about like anything that divides is heresy. That's really going to like, the problem is like I'm having conversations with you like it's the whole world involved in our conversation, and it just be us, and then I say something like expecting everybody to be like yeah, and they be like, hey man, stone this dude.
Man, I'm sorry, that's my fault.
It is your fault. No, I think, and anybody else who listens to Knox Unplugged is doing the same thing. They're like, yeah, dude, metaphysics. They be like, meta who?
Yeah.
You talking about
Meta
the new
what?
Facebook name?
Yeah.
The meta? No, man.
Entering the metaverse.
You know, so we took a little pause because you had to
Yeah.
go do a little thing on the phone, and I had to go do an interview, and I have to run to go paint my place because I'm selling it. That's a whole nother story. But, you know, so when we were talking about offices, I was thinking about the thing that everybody knows that we have an office problem.
Right.
And the people who are trying to head it off are the complementarians. The people who
Right.
claim complementarianism, they see this as a problem and they're like, ooh. And they think complementarianism is going to save them.
Right. They think
That's going to reestablish offices.
They see that the Bible talks about husbands and wives, and they see that it talks, and they look around and they say, oh yeah, and men and women are different. And they say, that must be, I mean, it's common sense. So that must be what the Bible's talking about. And there's to a certain extent, I mean, there's something common sense about husbands and wives are different, and all of that.
Well, she's a woman.
She's a woman. He's a man.
Yeah.
And that actually feels revolutionary often right now. But
compared to the culture, like
Right.
if you're building up your punches, you're counter punching to what the culture is instead of punching where the knockout is. Like then yes.
Yeah. Right. And so I think I don't think that complementarianism tends to dig into offices the way that it could or should, because it doesn't have a definition of reality that makes room, or that has a place in it where you can actually have a real authority.
Does it have a definition of reality or makes room where a place you can have real authority? Explain that.
So because complementarianism tends to say, well, there are differences, and so each should be doing this role or that role because they're good at that thing, right? That it's a purely an economic reality
Instead of
saying saying like the economic reality is in the observables, in the things we look around, men should lead their households because men are better at that.
Okay.
Or something along those lines, rather than
a metaphysical question that should be asked.
Metaphysical question that's asked that is always that Paul answers each time with a history lesson. Right? When Paul starts talking about what the complementarian questions, he answers with a history question, and you can tell the complementarians don't think in terms of offices because they don't know what to do with it. Right? You look at 1 Timothy, and they don't know what to do with
Pause right there.
Questions about Adam and Eve.
I have to give you a great example of this, and this isn't throwing salt or lying to anybody. I'm going to just say names because I'm just not.
Yeah.
So we were doing a thing at Founders Ministries. First time we went down there with Founders, and I remember Gabe was interviewing Josh Bice. Now this whole conference was because of the issue, the statement on social justice in the gospel, and they were hitting at they were going after it because I saw the problem, right? And I remember Josh Bice was talking about the role of man and woman. I think he was hitting between complementarianism, and I remember Gabe asking him, "Do you think a woman should be a police officer?" And now he was so strong on everything, but then when it came to the question, it was like possibly, like
Right.
it wasn't.
He wasn't able to immediately answer because it's not that, because you're not thinking in terms of of offices, administration, jurisdiction, those sorts of things.
Yeah, he's thinking more in lines of what economical questions that can be answered versus versus so offices.
Can she do the job or not?
Right. And, instead of asking a metaphysical question that answered Gabe's question,
right,
he was dealing more of like, well, physically she technically can, but because actually I think he said like, yeah, she could do it. It's probably not the best job, and I was like, wait, not the best? Like we just got done examining all these realities,
and the question of can a woman be a police officer? That's not a gendered office,
right?
So, so you have
the work gendered though?
Well, that's what I was going to say. So there are aspects of the office that the work is gendered, right? So you don't want to put a gun in a woman's hands and put her on the front lines, whether it's in your army or in your city.
Why?
Right? Because women are life givers, not by design.
The metaphysical reality.
The metaphysical reality.
They make humans. Put them together.
They're too important, right? They're not disposable. They're life givers, right? Men are disposable.
Time out. Okay, man, we're gonna be here for a while. We don't honor women like that.
Yeah, we don't think women are important in that way. Now there are aspects though of the office of police officer in which having a female officer is a good idea, right? So if you have a
detective, maybe
a detective, and so that is in a case. There's plenty of cases where having a female detective that has the skills of a detective, they're not going to be on the front lines. They're bringing the particular strengths of the female perspective into a case that's important. They're dealing with women.
Can we change female perspective? Can we change female's perspective? Only because I'm thinking of. I just want to change that line from female's perspective to.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
Dorothy Sayers,
because of what Sayers is saying, right?
Yeah.
Right, but there are strengths that a woman's going to bring into a situation.
Metaphysical realities
that a woman brings into a situation that a man doesn't, and so because it's not a gendered office, the question isn't can a woman do the work or not? Is it the right spot to put a woman? And sometimes the answer is yes in police work, right? So if you have
and because not all police work is the same work.
Because not all police work is the same work. There's a lot of different things that a detective does, so
that sounds sexist though.
It is sexist, and that's one of the blessings of having a metaphysical understanding that says sometimes women are going to be better at things than men.
And those things that they are better at is not an accident.
Right.
They're actually designed to be better.
To be better at it, right? So if you have, we have a friend who's a police detective who was talking about dealing with rape victims and how good it is to have a female detective that can deal when a woman comes in and says, I was raped, right? So there are times when you don't have a female detective around, and so he has to do the interview. And he said, you're asking questions that if you have a female detective, it's better to have her in that role doing that questioning, right? So
there's some things I want to say about that though. I feel like I want to protect her at all costs though, right? Like that's you know what I mean?
So I'm not saying he said, because you always go into those situations, two detectives together, right? And so when he said he had seen a difference when he goes in with a female detective into those interviews versus when he goes in with two male detectives, right? He had seen the difference. The difference is you got a better interview, right? You in that situation.
This is where I feel like the egalitarian or soft complementarians would be like, see, and that's why we need to have women elders. Because a pastor can't sit up there and understand a woman that has been raped in her abuse situation. So we need to have women elders who can deal with those situations with him.
Right, but that's like saying we need a woman husband because a husband would be then better at understanding a woman, right? It's a gendered role.
Right, but I'm saying apply that same thing to the detective who feels like it's better to have a woman.
But God hasn't told us that's a gendered role, right? That's the difference. Right?
Also, I also would say, so the pastor don't have a wife?
Right. So you want the pastor could have a wife, and I mean that you have the office of widow as well in Timothy, in which you need older women around.
That's a gendered.
It's a gendered role, right? You need. Paul makes it clear that the church needs mothers and grandmothers, right, of the church, right? And that role isn't something that can be fulfilled by a man. Now that's something that the female offices in the church all were dissolved in the Enlightenment as well, right? So Calvin, they're having discussions about the office of widow, about the office. You have abbotesses, which is the medieval office of widow, right? You've got a woman who, as Paul says, has been proved to be a good example that the younger women should look up to. She isn't supported by her family, and so the church supports her. Now that role, because she's needed by the church. Now he says, if a family can continue to support that woman, let the family continue to support that woman, because then she'll be around in the church.
That's the general norm.
That's the general norm. The church needs grandmothers and mothers and grandmothers in the church. And if
yes, we do.
For some reason her family is not able to support her financially, then the church should support her financially. She's that necessary. And so that's 1 Timothy. Paul spends a lot of time on it, and they discuss that, or Calvin, they're discussing how do we establish this. So there's debate about whether or not the name of that office is deaconess, eldress, widow. Right now, what we have done though, so because the Enlightenment turns offices into a power struggle, or
has had office into a power struggle, and dissolved them.
And then dissolved any of the offices that aren't just the offices at the top. We end up basically with offices with churches with one office. Sometimes it's called pastor. Sometimes it's called elder. I've seen Baptist churches where there's really just the one office, the deacon. Right? That's really the office, and then everybody works for that office, right? Rather than a plurality, not just of elders, but a plurality of offices, and then they're different. So the office of elder has a particular authority, just like the church.
It's funny because as you're saying this, I'm seeing exactly the structure of, of a government. Mm-hmm. Right, happening right there inside of the church, which is like what you're saying. We need to restore offices both to the church and to the family, right, if we're going to see it model out at all in the culture.
And the culture doesn't get it, and we say, yeah, sure, the culture doesn't get it, but of course they don't get it. The church doesn't.
We really don't get it.
We're supposed to be the example that's showing the world this is how you live with layered jurisdictions, right? And then we get to the office of widow, and we're like,
this fits inside of Melchizedek. I don't know what's going on.
Right, yeah. So we just kind of skip through it, and because we don't know what to do with it. But the church, the way that in Timothy that the church is set up is like a family, right? How can this man lead the family of God well if he doesn't lead his children well, right? So the overarching metaphor is the family in the garden. Right, it's in Timothy, right? That's the metaphor universe that the literary work of 1 Timothy is working within, and he consistently throughout the entire book uses one metaphor for the church, that it is the family of God within the garden. Right, and so he uses Adam and Eve, and he spends all this time talking about the order of creation in order to establish the offices within the church. Right, the order of creation is God creates. He creates the world. He makes Adam, He brings Adam into the garden, causes the garden to grow up. He tells him, don't eat you can eat everything except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then he goes and he creates Eve, and then he tells Adam and Eve together, you can eat everything. And then God goes away. And because he's established Adam as the husband, Adam's then tells Eve, hey, there's a one law in here. We can't eat that. But God has already gone away, right? And God has said it's all edible to Adam and Eve together. But then he's told Adam before he created Eve that to not eat of that tree. And so then Adam is the husband whose role it is to teach her to not eat that thing. But it's because he's the pastor husband, right? So when you get to Timothy, the order of creation matters because Adam was supposed to teach Eve. And so he says that's why the pastor is a man and not a woman, right? So because it's a gendered role from the very beginning, that it turns out Adam and Eve were actually the first pastor and congregation, right? So that's the metaphor universe that he is dealing within. So when he says, and if anyone desires to be an overseer, he desires a good thing, at the beginning of chapter 3, right, the first verse, he's not changing topics. He's still talking about Adam and Eve. Right. He's talking about how the pastor is the Adam in the garden of God's people. Right. And so then when you get to 4 and he starts talking about food laws and the need to throw out false teachers and that there's going to be somebody coming in and he's going to try.
The garden.
He's talking about the garden again, right?
Goodness,
he's talking about so that the pastoral role needs to be a man because he is leading God's Eve. He's representing Christ
my goodness,
to God's
Jason, don't forget
Eve.
where you're at because I just got to say this. We've obliterated Genesis in how we think of even managing the church, let alone
church, right?
When we talk about like complementarianism doesn't even get down to the depth of this.
We're not letting the metaphor universe be set, the poetry be set by God, right? So we get into chapter 4 and it's fights over food. It's fights over marriage, and it's the pastor's job to bring the word of God to those fights, and that's the weapon that he uses to defend the people. And then it switches into now, how is it that we then, now that we have established the offices, now that we have defended the garden, how is it that we glorify the bride? And so we move into the discussion of women and widows, and right. So so Paul is clearly talking the entire book within the same metaphor universe of the Garden of Eden. We break it up into sections, and we don't think of it as one work of literature, and so we because all we're doing is lose grammar, the offices.
We're doing grammar and logic, and we're missing.
We're missing the rhetoric.
The rhetoric of the whole thing.
So 1 Timothy is this beautiful book about how the Garden of Eden continues to apply in the way the church is organized, and
oh, that makes so much sense.
We turn it into a list of rules.
When Paul tells Timothy that their end will be like Janus and Jambres, but you, Timothy, stay in my word and continue on the things I've taught you.
Yeah.
It's like, you'd be faithful, you prune the garden, you discipline, you teach, and you're going to have a great and fruitful garden that's going to spread out through the rest of the world.
Right.
Just like it was supposed to happen in Genesis.
Yep. Yeah. And every church continues to be that, right? And so we want to turn the church into something other than what it is. And we reorganize the church mostly now around business principles, unfortunately, but it's rather than the family principles. Okay. So, but that's what I mean when if you're already saying, well, a woman could do the work, right? So why can't she be a pastor? You've already lost your imagination is already over the edge, right?
Well, and I think it's that question too. So it's funny because as you're talking about offices, some offices are actually sexed offices, and if you mess that up, you mess up the whole narrative, right?
Right.
And so, but that doesn't just stay in the church. That actually comes in the home. Actually, the home, in one sense or another, God kind of merges them all together in Genesis, right? And then we see this kind of split happening as time to show the bigger revelation of what he's doing in the world, right? But then you start seeing these offices. How do you model this in such a way where you start seeing offices now that are held outside of your, maybe we should stay with the home first. Go back to the home, deal with offices in the home.
Yeah.
And then maybe go to, then how do we start seeing offices properly in society?
Yeah. So
because those got to be sex too.
Well, some of them are and some of them aren't, right?
Yeah.
Because and that's where
takes wisdom.
It takes wisdom because that you don't want to go beyond what God says, right? So husband, pastor, right? King and queen, right? You've got things that are very much offices that are gendered, right? And it's,
oh my goodness, this is why queer theory is so horrible,
right? Well, and why it's really just Marx's eternal revolution, right? Queer theory is just another example of the eternal revolution that Gnosticism requires, because you can only move forward through chaos, right?
And so destruction.
What is it that we need? Well, whatever brings the most chaos. What happens to bring the most chaos right now? Queer theory.
Well, that's Kantianism too.
It's Kant. Yeah, Kant is just refried Gnosticism, right? And you don't even get.
And that's what queer theory is. It's made to depict against. What's that?
You don't even get it in a taco like refried beans. You know, it's just refried Gnosticism.
I'm gonna just yes. So because with queer theory, all it's designed to do is to pick apart anything that's normative.
Right.
So what we should be seeing when we see queer theory and even critical race theory is the idea of dismantling even further our fragmented understanding of offices, right? So queer theory completely obliterates, this is making so much sense. It's obliterating men and women and what's normative about them, which also obliterates marriage, which also obliterates children, which of course you get abortion. Of course you get
and
pornography.
And I think abortion too that's the tip of the spear of queer theory.
Right.
It's because this is how offices work, right? You've got authority and a responsibility that come with an office, and then you get subjects, right? People that are subject to your office.
Okay, we're talking about the home right now. Is that what we're talking about?
We're just talking general.
Okay,
right now.
Okay, all right.
So you've got the head and the subject within the structure of an office. The head holds the office, and then the subject, and the subject, what they get is they get access, right, and they get protection, right. And so in abortion, in a father-son, father-child relationship, you've got the head and the subject. The subject is due protection, right?
I'm getting it.
And so it's the father and the mother are both parents. That's an office, and the child is due the protection, right, as the subject.
And this is modeled throughout all of creation. That is exactly. So we got Father God, we're subjects. He protect. So we see this model over and over again, and then this obliteration, abortion is office is being obliterated,
right? And so you've got protection and then provision, which is just protection extended over time, right? So protection and provision is usually how it's broken down, and protection is in the immediate, and provision is historical.
So this is when Jeff Schaefer, when he talks about the beginning of abortion happened with the right granted to parents not to have for birth control, right? Not to actually have to be parents. He's like, that's when they obliterated the family. They obliterated office because that's what comes from them, right?
Yeah.
So when they said, oh, you don't have to be a father or you don't have to be a mother, you can control all that stuff now. Then what they did was obliterated the very thing that the office creates, which is subjects, like you just said, right?
Yeah. So you can have a head that's empty of subjects, but it's actually not that's a tragedy. So when a husband and wife aren't able to have kids, that's a tragedy, right? And for most people, that's even how they experience it, even though you're not allowed to say it anymore, right? But it actually is.
That is, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so you've got but the tragic is normalized. But the thing is the law, because common law is common law, even if it's attempting to be positive law. The law always comes in and gives what is normative. It just describes what is normative. It doesn't create. Law doesn't have the ability. God did not make a world in which law had the ability to do that. Right? So our laws, so even in a positivist setting where it comes in and say, now you don't have to do this, it's because there was already a breakdown. We already had the responsibilities of the office holder being dissolved. So the law just comes in and says, and now you're allowed to do what you've been doing anyway.
This whole time,
right?
anyway.
If we want to change society, we can't say by fixing the laws we've changed society. The laws always flow.
The law is the fruit of what's been happening at the root the whole time. Okay, so this is really fascinating for me. So these offices, you start losing these offices, and you lose what these offices bring to subjects.
Yeah. So you lose the protection.
You lose fruitfulness first.
You lose fruitfulness. And then you lose the protection and the provision, and you lose the access as well, which is due to them. So,
but then if the offices are destroyed, and this makes so much more sense now to me too. Even with Schaefer, Jeff Schaefer is phenomenal. If you haven't heard, you have to go back and listen to that show with Jeff Schaefer. It's phenomenal. But you also then what you start perpetuating from then on out is then the office of husband and wife are now gone too.
Right. And so the office of husband and here's this is what I mean by not thinking in terms of just strength, power, and authority, strength and power, but thinking in terms of offices and authority that are layered, because the husband is an office, the wife is a subject, but then there's also in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul says, but the wife is also an office that has her husband for a subject, right? So you've got, they both have realms of authority that God has given them that they are supposed to wear and use for the protection and provision of their subject, right? So the husband is the head over his wife, and then I believe it's 1 Corinthians 7:4, where the wife is also given authority over her husband's body, right? So you can't have that if it's just a matter of power. You can't have your subject also be your head, except for in God's economy, because there's a distinction between the economic and the ontological, and that the offices don't affect that distinction. You can have a situation in which the husband is the head over his wife, and the wife is the head over her husband's body, right? Has the authority over her husband's body, right? So, and the authority comes with it the responsibility to provide and protect, right? So, and then being the subject, you can expect the protection and the provision, and you are granted access as the subject to the head, right? So those are the love that is required that from a head is required by God, and it comes with the authority that is then for the provision and the protection of the subjects. All of that is lost when you switch it to a power game, right? When you switch it to a game of who gets to be in charge, right? All of that is lost, and so whoever is the weakest no longer is owed protection. The weakest is just down further on the chain, and the one who's strongest gets to do whatever they want. I mean, that's why you have that's the metaphysical reason that now you have the problems that we're having in terms of the breakdown of society, leading to the poor being taken advantage of, leading to the weak being taken advantage of, leading to people celebrating the fact that every Down syndrome child in I believe Iceland, every Down syndrome child was aborted, and they had a party because they accomplished the goal. You think, well, that is evil, right? I mean, I had a movie made a movie written that regularly it got traction, right? Romantic comedy about an amputee. It was an amputee romantic comedy, and it's a young man with one leg who works at a Down syndrome house, right? Who is winning over the daughter of a mob boss, right? It was a funny movie. It's comedy, but the reason that I wrote it, I immediately started working on it the day I read the article about the celebration of the no more Down syndrome, of no more living Down syndrome children in an entire nation, because I thought about the Down syndrome kids in my church. I taught special ed for 2 years, and the Down syndrome kids. Like, what a tragedy that you're not blessed with those people and with those gifts in society, right? If you've spent any time with Down syndrome people, the gift that they are. And I thought, we've got to turn that tide, right? And so I'm a storyteller, so wrote a movie over and over. It gets through the second round at a studio, and then they get notice. We were told no Down syndrome kids in movies, right? We're told no Down syndrome kids. Now, I think that's demonic. I mean, I think literally demonic, right? This is actually that there are demons wanting us to sacrifice our Down syndrome kids on altars.
We can't even get the ones who don't have Down syndrome to be they're sacred. Just, you know what I mean?
But there's literally no protections for the weak when you get rid of the offices whose job it is to protect at all cost. Right, a father's job is protect at all cost. Right, a mother's job protect at all cost. That's the responsibility of the office. You get rid of the office, and you get rid of the responsibility. Right, that's the tragedy of the when you read about the effect that the Chicago projects had on the black family. Right? Those sorts of stories, right? That's why I said we've got to at some point talk about Gropius, the architect that put together the projects. He's one of my great nemesis, right? Historically speaking, our great nemesis, because the destruction of the family that he set out to accomplish by means of government subsidies, government housing, right? And he on purpose, he wanted to undermine the family, especially the family of immigrants and black families.
This is what I get. This is why Jason,
using government funds. Just want to say that one more time.
No.
Don't trust the government.
One more again.
Yeah.
Government funds. When the social justice movement decides to pick a fight, they always are digging in the wrong spot.
Right. Because there are absolutely grave injustices.
Right.
Right.
It's always been my problem. It's like, why are you guys digging here?
And the government has always been, not always, but the government in the last 100 years, the government has been the one doing them.
Well, and
right?
I feel like
and so now they're like, the social justice, and now the government's like, we can co-opt the social justice movement in order to gain power. Right. And because the federal government takes no competitors,
they can't compete with it.
Yeah, it lets no competitors survive right now. But it's been that way for a while, and the black family was one of those competitors.
And this is why
it's
this
too
bothers
strong.
Exactly, and not just so. I think there is a responsibility to Black culture, and particularly those inside of the movement who have seen this as civil rights, whatever you want to call them, whoever you want to call them, there's a responsibility to that group to say, this don't stop with race, right? That's what's been really pissing me off, is because if anybody knows the downfall to what it looks like for the government to obliterate offices, we know.
Right.
And we should be saying, this doesn't, look, it caught on with us through all these little things, mainly because of the federal government. And we were self-sufficient. We ain't need nothing to nobody else. And it tore us up. Don't go down that way.
Right.
But instead, that's not the message. Okay, we can get there for all day. So tell me something. So when you, that really makes me mad, because they should be sounding the alarm right now for everybody. And instead, there's this grasping that I think, like, what are you doing? How do you, when you come in, let's just use the black family, for example. They're strong, they're vibrant, they are coming out victorious while they are still legally and other things in bondage. And it's like the children of Israel thriving, you know, and they're doing super well. How do you chip away at those offices to the point that now you have a group of people? So they go through all the 3 stages that happens after World War I and so on and so forth. Yeah. But they were kind of like the first point of, I always consider the black culture in one way or another to be kind of the American pulse on where we are, where we're at, right?
Yeah. Walker Percy talks about that too.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody else say that before.
Yeah. Walker Percy could see it. So he was living in Louisiana, and he just said how a powerless black African was treated when he's put into your hand and has no way to defend himself, is going to be the way God treats you back, right? So God says, here, he said, I gave you one job. Take good care of a powerless black African that was put into your hands, right? It was dropped off on your shore. And you didn't do it. You use your office. Use your office to protect and provide, and you didn't do it. And so he said he said it's going to continue to come back over and over. Come back over and over.
Abortion. Here we are. And look who is the most aborted.
Right. Yeah. Right. You read. Margaret Sanger went from Ku Klux Klan meeting to Ku Klux Klan meeting to get the money she needed to start Planned Parenthood.
And where do we put them at? The majority in inner city black community.
Who do they put on the Planned Parenthood advertisements? Right? Blacks and Latinos, because that's who they want to weed from the human race, as she said.
So how
eloquently.
How do you destroy offices from a strong group? Because you got a strong group of people.
A strong group. So
you don't just do it at one.
They didn't do it all at once. They did it through a number of means, though. So they through subsidizing, not marrying, right? So you say, hey, this is the amount of money we'll give you to take care of your kid if you don't get married, right? So that was a major thing. So they subsidized not getting married. So they subsidized single motherhood, right? Started doing that in the 70s.
Can I start maybe earlier than that?
Yeah.
So not just in the 70s, but I think you first have to create a culture and environment where your hard work doesn't look like it's going to matter. So there's no protection under the law for you.
Right.
So, at Black Wall Street, it came back, all that stuff like that, but there was nobody who was judged.
Yeah, right.
You got the Colfax massacre. The law didn't work equally to everybody. So there was economic realities that weren't consistent across the board because there was an ontological heresy.
An assumption of ontological inequality.
Yeah, there you go. And so you get that, and so you get, there is a reality where it's like, well, nothing I do seems to work. I do this and I don't get there, and these guys work hard, but who wants to work that hard? And so, well, you don't have to work that hard. Here's an option for you. I think you kind of have to set the stage in one way or another to get that.
So that's called theft. Right? I mean, so you start by stealing. So the history of the slave trade is way more complex than we want to let it be. So
Yeah,
there were people that were stolen. There's a beautiful documentary called "Throw Down Your Heart." It's about the music of Africa, and that's something that I've spent a lot of time. The music of Africa is amazing, and but it's called "Throw Down Your Heart" because there's a port, the port where the slave trade that the Muslims centered the slave trade in Africa. There was a saying that if you show up in this city in chains, you may as well throw down your heart because you'll never see your people or your land again. Right? And so there's a banjo player who travels around and plays with all of the greatest musicians of Africa, named Bela Fleck is the banjo player's name, and it's a beautiful documentary. But you hear the story of of how, as Islam spread through Africa, the slave trade becomes really, really lucrative for these different Muslim traders, and then once Christians, and this is to our shame, once Christendom begins engaging in that slave trade, that's in a lot of ways that is the beginning of the downfall of Christendom. Right? The fact that we engaged with the slave trade of the Muslim peoples, because really there was Christendom, and then there was really an anti-Christendom in Islam. The Islamic world was held together by coercion and force in a way that Christendom wasn't, and so it was kind of a photo negative of Christendom. The moment that we began engaging in the slave trade with them, that became the connection between Christendom and the Muslim nations, loosely held together.
Form of syncretism at that point. Yeah.
That really became that unplugged the bottom of the boat in Christendom. That's when it began to sink. Right? And so
Alex de Tocqueville saw that same thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so America began engaging in that slave trade, and it really undoes that, as much as anything, undoes the metaphysical assumptions when it becomes legalized shortly before 1776, because it's not 1619, because it's still illegal in 1619, but it's being done covertly and illegally.
Well, guess what? The law comes into place, like you said. After
the law comes in, once we allow it long enough, then the law comes in and says, okay, now it's going to be legalized.
Yeah, I think it was David Fowler who found the laws.
He heard us talking about it, and he sent us the particular case law.
Because it wasn't allowed for it.
It wasn't allowed, because it was illegal in common law. Yeah. So, because technically, every one of those slaves in 1619, when they stepped foot on British, in a British colony, they were free.
They were free people.
So they should have, had the rest of the colony said, "Hey, welcome. We're so glad you're here. You're free.
And
come to church with me on Sunday."
With an office say, "Hey, and we'll protect you."
And the office provided them the protection and provision that they were deserved, that they were owed, not that they deserved. That's just different, because Paul could say, "Owe no man but love," and that's what love looks like. So you can owe someone, but without them deserving it. Right? So, but they, as humans standing on British soil, they were not slaves according to common law. But then we allowed it long enough that it was then legalized in, I believe, the late 1750s through the common law system. And so then, but that was the unplugging of the cork at the bottom of the ship of Western civilization, was when we syncretized, when we allowed that, the beginning of that. So, which I'm looking forward to the day that God raises that ship from the bottom and reestablishes Christendom and all that. But,
and that's where I want to get to. So then these offices, that's the beginning of it.
So that's the beginning of it. But then the particular places that the black families undermined is through theft, and that, like you were talking about, through the subsidizing of single motherhood, and then I think the introduction of crack cocaine by the CIA did a major
destabilizing effect on the family.
of the family, right? So you look at these and you think these are justice issues, right? So the social justice movement, it's not a problem that you look at it and say, no, these are major crimes that were committed. I think what the issue with a lot of the social justice things is they are not dealing in crimes. So they're not dealing in justice. We need to look at the actual crimes that often are committed by the government, but because the social justice world tends to view things in terms of an economic and ontological marriage.
Yeah, merger. Yeah,
they're looking to the top. They're trying to get to the top to gain enough power to then be able to deal with all of the problems, rather than saying when the office at the top commits the crime, there are other offices whose job it is to step in and hold them accountable. Right? That's what we need. The CIA should just be abolished.
Amen.
So that would be,
along with government schools, they can all go the same way. Yeah, and the feds. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, government schools, I think, they have been turned, and now the folks on the right are trying to turn them back, but they're not. Rather than saying, "Wait, whose responsibility? What's the office's responsibility to provide?" And anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But I think
the ground has to be laid for an environment that makes the office holders want to capitulate responsibility.
Yep. Yeah. That subsidizes their capitulation, I think.
Okay.
Right. Because so if you can, if the capitulation is subsidized, you get more of what you subsidize, right? And that, I think that's what, I mean, when I look at the last 100 years of America and the history of the black family, I see the government subsidizing the capitulation of fathers for, I think, nefarious ends. I mean, I think they don't want a challenger, and I think they tried things out that now they're using widely and broadly on everybody.
Yeah, because it worked.
Yeah,
right. Like they finally got it right. Right. I think they finally got it right.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of the problem with what I've seen with Italians, with Scots, with a lot of the people that came in during the early 20s. They came in the same way, not the same way, but they came in the same environment that I think a lot of black people had. Yep. But they weren't used. They were allowed to integrate without being used as test subjects to politics. Like the black family was, yes. Right? And that's because they had a different course.
Different history.
History.
Yeah, definitely you had, I mean, the Irish were mistreated, the Chinese were mistreated.
All of them were, yeah. They have a lot of the same narrative pieces and elements to them, but then one is a political pawn.
Right. One, and I think that, unfortunately, I think the civil rights movement also has been co-opted as
it was from jump. From jump. So
I'm still pissed about Juneteenth.
We gotta talk about Juneteenth one day. So I want to get to the offices. Though.
It's coming up again.
Oh, that's right. We got to do a special Juneteenth.
We got to do a special Juneteenth episode.
I'll
save up all my insults for Joe Biden.
Let's do this. Let's do it. Well, because there's a historical reality that leads to Juneteenth that shouldn't have anything to do with Joe Biden. But I'll take one side. You can take the other side.
Yeah, okay.
I'll poke this way. You poke that way. I want to get these because I think here's what I want everybody to understand. At least what I'm trying to communicate to a lot of my friends, and it was really helpful. 2020 was really helpful to try and communicate this. Everybody's looking at the black family and saying, you can't do that. They're using them. The left is using them one way. Republicans are using them another. And I'm trying to say, you guys understand this is not a political pawn. What the government is doing is happening to the whole kit and caboodle of everybody.
Right.
It's happening to us all.
Yeah.
The offices are being obliterated. And so it's not just a black people problem anymore.
Right.
Right. You understand that?
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, and I think the fact that we allowed it to happen to the black community without the Christian community saying, wait, whoa, no. Right. Without, because the offices of pastor. So this is where that from Office to Profession, the book that about the church's failed response to the abolition movement, right? The same thing, right? That book, it shows that the church's failed response to the abolition movement was to step away from offices, step away from the responsibilities of the offices that pastors have. They have a public office and they have particular responsibilities because of abolition, because of their failure to respond during the leading up to the Civil War and the abolition movement. That failure to respond dissolved the public nature of the pastoral office. So but the black church still had a public office.
Yeah.
Its pastoral office was still a public office because it had responded to abolition the way that it should have, right? So
which is why it was so strong in the 60s.
That's why it was so strong, right? And you look at the history of the black pastor, they held a public office much more comfortably. I mean, well, white pastors stopped holding a public office now in America, right? Because have you seen that photo of all of the Orthodox priests linking arms between the two armies? Yeah, right. That's what it looks like for pastors to understand they hold a public office, right? They put on their robe, they put on the turban, the hat that symbolizes their office. They take all the liturgical crosses, which Protestants don't have in outside of the Anglican Church. Most Protestants have stopped using sort of the liturgical implements, but there's nothing sinful about the particular liturgical implements that they're using. It's just not within the Protestant tradition, but they are symbolic of the public office that they hold, right? Yeah. So it's the gavel, right? That when you're in court and the judge picks up a gavel, you say, "Oh, dang." Right? So it's the same thing, right? It's the symbolic of the public office. It's the externalization. It's the wearing of the public office. And they go out and they link arms between the two armies. Battle's over. Right. That battle's not happening.
God just ended this war.
God ended the war through the public office of his ministers. Right? And that happened. That was still happening with the black church in America. Yeah. Up until the late 70s, early 80s is when it starts to dissolve, and and it's the same thing. You've got the subsidization of the lack of stepping away from your responsibility. The Democratic Party started paying for it.
When you start talking about offices, I think I can hear, so many of my Christian friends, like, they got to be scratching their heads saying, like, how many ways have I capitulated so that I don't hold, this goes to our trend. We've been talking, you said a couple shows ago, we're probably in a 150-year battle. Right? Yeah. That's a 150-year turn, right? And all I can think about, okay, I believe in resurrection, so I know that we can come out of this even sooner than that. It's not a false reality. But we're not coming out of this apart from that particular reality of the offices being restored. Facts, right? Like
that's what Reformation is going to look like.
Interesting.
It's reestablishment of public offices.
So what does it look? So the beginning of it would be what, a podcast?
Man, God has used weaker vessels.
Yeah, that's true.
Spoken out of other donkeys before.
So. Why are you talking about me like that? Hey, I'll be that if God's talking.
If God's talking, I'm happy to be the donkey.
So what does it look like then for us to begin that? Because I feel there is a need of a lot of repentance, I think, to happen, to be like, okay, Lord.
I think it's repentance, and then the embrace of the place where we hold an office, and the place where we hold a subjecthood, where we are the subject, we embrace those by faith, because it's no longer, you can't see them right now. They're visible, right? But we say, I'm a husband, right? How do I embrace that role by faith? Wear that authority for the benefit of my wife and kids. I'm a wife. How do I embrace that office by faith? Wear that authority for the benefit of my husband and my children.
What do you mean by faith?
So God defines the world with His word, right? And He gives promises to those that trust Him and obey Him, and we say, I'm going to live as if those promises are true, right? So presumption lives as if it says, I'm going to trust this thing that God hasn't said, right? So and we live according to something a promise God hasn't given.
But He's God and He loves me, so He'll do it.
He's going to take care of it, right? And faithlessness says, okay, God has promised this thing, but I'm not going to live according to it. Faith says, I trust you, Lord. You've promised this thing. You've defined the world this way. You've promised this thing. I'm going to live according to it. So by faith, we embrace the offices that are within our reach. And for most of us, that's our family. And then as a church member, we look at the authorities that God has put over us, and we pray for them. We're grateful for them. We submit to them. And you got to remember that submission has to do with seeing the mission that God has given somebody over you and giving yourself to that mission. Right?
Yeah.
So what is the mission that God has given your local church? Submission to your leaders has to do with embracing that mission, right? So embracing the worship within the city that God has given you, or the town or the county or whatever God has given you, embracing that role, and throwing yourself into that mission, and coming under the mission of the authorities that God has put over you. And that can be messy because you're dealing with people, but God hasn't said, I'm going to establish infallible authorities in the world.
Right.
The only infallible authority that He's established is the public literature of the scriptures. Right? That's the only infallible authority. That authority creates its own hearers, or creates its own audience. That authority establishes the fallible authorities of the world, and then we embrace those. And we live in a world where a lot of the authorities of the world have dissolved, but we know by faith that God is going to raise them from the dead. I mean, that's Abraham brought Isaac up the mountain because he believed God raises the dead. Right? So he didn't think, oh, God will give me a different Isaac. He said, oh, God's going to give me this Isaac back. Right? He believed God raises the dead. Right? That was the faith that he had. And so we look around at the things that God has killed and say, I'm sure glad God raises the dead. Right? We're like Ezekiel on the edge of our seats looking at a field full of bones, saying, okay, when's the wind going to blow? When are the bones going to start to rattle? Because, man, I can't wait to see these bones get up and dance.
Yeah, our posture is completely different because we believe in resurrection.
Right.
We believe in resurrection. So then you said fathers need to live by faith.
Yeah, fathers, by faith. Because if we just look at it and say, because being a father is literally a task you can't accomplish. He's given you something bigger than you. It's a 1 Corinthians 1, 7, and 8 situation. He's given you a load that will crush you so that you can learn to trust the God who raises the dead. Right? That's what fathering is. That's what mothering is. That's what parenting is. That's what being a husband, being a wife is. You can't actually accomplish it. Right? But that's the whole point of God giving you a robe that's too heavy for you. Right, is so that you will be raised from the dead when it crushes you over and over and over throughout your life. If you're a pastor, it's the same thing. You have been given an office too heavy for you to carry.
And our biggest mistake is saying, I can do it.
I can do it, right? You think, and that's what complementarian is. That's what really bugs me about complementarianism. Now you got me talking. I usually keep all this stuff to myself.
No, this is what I want right here.
What bugs me about complementarianism is that you say, well, he's given males to this role because they tend to be better at it. It's like, what males are you talking about? We are terrible at this. This robe is way too heavy for me to wear comfortably. But that's actually the purpose of it, right? Is it throws you back to the feet of Jesus over and over and over, because you say, I can't carry this. And he's like, well, I know you can't. Come back over here. Let me put it back on you, right? And that's so it's.
You're so right, because that's exactly where the egalitarians and soft complementarians beat us up at, which is like, well, if it's about who can do it better,
right? It's like, but it's not. The whole point is, you can't do it, right? So I had the benefit of being a church planter for about a decade, and it's literally something you can't do, right? The calling of a church planter is to go into an area that doesn't have a church, and with your words call into existence something that didn't exist before, right? Go make a new church. I can't do that. Paul even says, I don't have a pen that writes on hearts. I don't have an iron pen that writes on hearts. Right? If Paul doesn't, how much less do I? Right? So you go in. So it's something that has to be accomplished by faith, right? And the realization that I had in the midst of that is, that's every office. Every office is come over here and reflect Jesus to these people. You're like, well, except for I'm like a broken mirror. I can't do that. Well, it's by faith. You do it by faith, and then repent when you fail. Right? Go ask for forgiveness, and remember what it says in Psalm 130. You repent so that you will be feared. Right? That's what what you want. A subject loves upstream to the head by respect. Right? And how do we get that? By acknowledging our weaknesses, by repenting of our sins. Right? That's what it looks like.
And the lie is, if you repent, you won't have power.
You'll have less. Yeah. So the way that God built and set up the world is such that he puts people into offices that can't accomplish it. It can only be done by faith. And then we're all given somebody over us in that situation. So then by faith we say, okay, Lord, right, I'm going to step into this office, into the subjection to this officer, be the subject of this head of this office by faith as well, because I know that person that you've put over me is somebody that is stumbling towards glory, right? And what does it look like for me to love and support my elders, my pastor? What does it look like for me to love and support my husband, who's head over me, or my wife who's has responsibility for my body, right? What does it look like for me to love and support up the chain of authority, and to embrace those by faith, and know, like, we haven't done it for generations, so we're going to be bad at this, right? and just enjoy that, like, oh man, like it's there's not a ton of little kids listening, right? Because it's like when you first get married and everybody's bad at sex, and you're like, wow, but it's still a lot of fun. But man, you're bad at it.
We're horrible at this, and we love it. Right? Let's just keep going. That's actually a really good point. Yeah, right. No, that's really a good point.
It's like, but so there's a way to embrace being bad at something together.
Jason, that's a really good point, because
enjoy and faith,
because what people don't tell you is that there's a faithlessness about that. People don't tell you the joy of marriage gets so much better. Right. They don't tell you that at all, right? And so, because I don't know why necessarily. I think it's just faithlessness is like, oh, it's going to get better. No, it actually gets better. Yeah. And I was telling my son, these are fun. It's funny because all this is connected. He's like, my daughter, we went bowling. She's usually good at everything. And she guttered every ball. And she was like, I don't want to bowl anymore. I was like, baby, this is your first time you ever bowled.
Right.
It's like, everything you did, trust me, Daddy saw you were horrible at it. You couldn't walk. You couldn't even pee in the potty, girl. Right. Right. And when you tried, you were horrible at it, right? You couldn't brush your teeth. You couldn't talk. You couldn't do any of this stuff. It took you time to learn to do these things well. And so because my second, I know we're going to go, but my second thing was, and maybe the answer is that, maybe we'll talk about this next time. In order for us to move from one place of government to the other, the establishment of offices has to come from church or home first.
Right. Yeah.
Which one? Or both at the same time?
I mean,
because it feels like if you kind of get the church, then you start seeing it modeled, and the family's like, oh, what is going on here?
Yeah. So, and that's throughout history, God's done it different ways. But when one of the institutions that God has established fails, generally the model throughout history has been that it's re-incubated within the church and then sent back out and reestablished. Right. So when the Roman Empire fell, the church for a time took over the judicial system and took over different aspects of it and re-incubated it and then reestablished it. Right. Because the Roman Empire, literally 1 week to the next, you went from having a judicial system that you could go down and use to the paycheck stopped showing up, and so they all walked away. All the judges just walked away from their posts because no paychecks.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, where do we go? And the church said, well, we'll take care of it. And so the judicial system was incubated and reestablished by the church, and then and I think
that's where we got robes from, right?
That's one of the places where the black robe comes from. Yeah. So
right.
Because then that happened with the family, right? Through the system of the monastery systems in the late 700s-800s,
right.
The family has a complete breakdown because the family was so integrated into the idolatry of the clan that as the clan started to repent of its idolatry, the actual family systems began dissolving throughout the European areas.
Because this must be wrong. Because
right, yeah, so they didn't know what to do, and so the monastery systems, monks and nuns were not unmarried until later, right?
I remember you told me this is
so
why.
You had,
yeah.
You basically had the monastery system incubating the restoration of the family, and then releasing it back into its proper domain. I think we're in a situation where the church is going to need to do that re-incubate the family, and then I think there's I don't think I'm not getting into prediction mode, but I'm going to get into prediction mode.
Okay,
I think we've got the technocracy is going to dissolve the. I think the major governments of the world are going to be set aside, and they'll have to be re-incubated next by the church. But right now, I think we're re-incubating the family, which was dissolved by the nationalism.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I was thinking about this as you were talking. I feel it might come the other way around. Where the
church needs to, it could be. We haven't seen that before, but God does new things.
Well, the only reason I say that is because we haven't seen where people don't know what a man and woman is anymore.
Right.
And the place where that was a foundational reality was the church.
Yeah.
And the church can't define that anymore, or offices.
Right.
So so when you lose it, I'm not saying that I think what you're going to have is a revival of the family that says, where are our pastors?
Yeah. No, you are probably right.
And call for holy men from among them to be appointed to these offices once again.
Right.
And say, here, go do pastor stuff for us.
Yeah. What's interesting is the number of times throughout history that so this has happened where the church has fallen apart before, but then, Luther was already in the ministry when he was converted.
Right.
So
he was in monastery,
you have the same thing happen in England, right? You have ministers converted after their ordination. You have a Man for All Seasons. Was that A Man for All Seasons? Is that the play about? Nope, that's Thomas More. I'm thinking of a different play, but it happened in the 1200s in England as well. It's a major revival. But it's the king's best friend all growing up that they got into all sorts of trouble with when he was just a prince, and he ends up being made the Archbishop of Canterbury because he thinks, oh, we're going to have so much fun together. And then he gets converted and he starts taking his job really seriously, and he and the king end up in all these clashes. And he's like, I put you in because we were going to have so much fun together, and
you were the chosen one.
And then he ends up, being murdered. But that his death leads to a major revival within the clergy, amongst the clergy, and so God cares about His church. He doesn't let it go, and I expect that we're going to see some major reformation.
I think we are too. So the idea of office, by how you say that? Sietsma.
It's hard to find. Even on Amazon, there was just the one copy left.
Mine's like a week out still. But it's not a big book. This book is, what else is good to read? 101 pages on that one. What else would you recommend?
Man. So this is where, the poetry of the glory of offices is the thing that we actually need to dig into, because it's not enough to get the theory. Like this is actually, there's a fundamental beauty that we're missing out on.
Like in Timothy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like in Timothy in Genesis.
So, and this is where The Man Who Was Thursday is a novel by G.K. Chesterton. It's a mystery novel.
Why do you do this? You know, it's so funny. I hate when you do this. And he did the same thing with like Walker Percy. I want to read theological stuff. I know.
Yeah, but that's not what you need. You need poems and novels.
Okay, so then here's my thing.
The King Arthur stories, it's the ones written before the early King Arthur stories. The poetry, the beauty of public offices. I mean, I still read King Arthur, and it brings a tear to my eye, and because it's so beautiful to have public offices.
King Arthur stories?
King Arthur stories, yeah, the old King Arthur stories. It's all about Arthur and the Round Table, and but Narnia. So Narnia, there's a lot.
How am I supposed to exegete? Okay, so then what are
That's the thing, you don't exegete. This is about the landscaping of our imagination to love what is good, to love what is beautiful.
It's such a hard transition coming from. It's a challenging one.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you this, because it's been good. It's been good. So then what's some other poetry I need to read, or I should have? What's beginner poetry?
Yeah.
Now you got poetry books.
Yeah.
We never talk about them.
But I've got two. A third one's about ready. I also just finished the introduction to Joffrey Swait's got a book of poetry coming out. That's really good.
You know what happens though when I read poetry sometimes, and I'm like, that's good, I guess. It's for something. I don't know what to use this for. It's kind of like having like a machine gun and being like,
it is, and you're like, I mean,
I guess this is powerful.
It was loaded and I shot through it. I don't know how to reload it. I don't know how it all works.
Until you start doing stuff like you did with Timothy, or you just did stuff with the rainbow code, and it's like
maybe this is what the class that we need is do a poetry class.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's do that.
Okay.
I want to do that. We'll do what kind of class would that be? What was it? Your last class was on?
Last class was on screenwriting.
Screenwriting. This one's on poetry.
This one's on poetry, yeah.
The language of adulthood.
Yeah,
I'm not going to title it.
But I mean, just the reading and writing of poetry, maybe. Or
no, that's boring. What's something else that would make Kyle and Heather be like, that title was?
I like the poetry, the language of adulthood. Discovering the language of adulthood.
No, but you said something earlier in our conversation that was like poetry is for like, I'll have to go back and listen, but you labeled it. You basically said grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and you said rhetoric is a mature way of communicating or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I have to go back and listen to it. Well, like I do with all these. I go back like 3 times and I listen to it at least twice. Some of them are like 3 times. I listen to it. We'll splice this one together. All right. So nope, your poetry, you didn't go for it.
My poetry, I've got 20 Wild Decembers and No One Doubts a Belly Laugh are the two names of my collections of poetry.
That one, I did read that one. That one really helped me because I started thinking differently about how I communicated to atheists. No One Doubts a Belly Laugh.
Yeah.
Like that messed me up because I heard that and I was like, oh snap. And I started going through and I was like, wait a second. The realities of the world and the way I communicate somehow are spliced differently. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, I got to figure out how to communicate, which is what faith is, believing reality, which is the way that God has made the world, right? Faith is believing the reality that God has said versus the faux reality that's being taken down, destroyed as the kingdom is spread. I'm a poet, didn't know it. No One Doubts a Belly Laugh. And
I mean, I'm just always grabbing collections of poetry that you can find and reading them and enjoying them. And I mean, it's because it's just a matter of becoming a fluent reader to understand poetry. Because poetry's specialty is the ability to look in multiple directions at once. And that's what wisdom is. So poetry, learning to read poetry is the process of having your eyes uncrossed by great authors.